I'm very grateful for Professor Kirkova because she did lay a lot of groundwork for what I'm talking about. I think that is a very good sort of introduction. Greetings from Berkeley. I'm going to take you from California to a region in China, which you may or may not have visited before. My talk is entitled From Lingyun to Kang Youwei, which is kind of a sort of an interesting, qua Shidai sort of spanning, millennia kind of a journey. But I think you would probably find it interesting. So follow me for a second or two. And here's the structure, sort of, I'm giving you a bit of a cartographic orientation, visual introduction, real life narratives and descriptors, and the poet's imagined mountain. I'm not a seasoned translator of poetry myself. What I am is I am a roamer and gatherer of mountains. Okay, so I've been to about 80 to 90 mountains in China, some of them repeatedly, and I know my way around topography. I'm also an ecologist. I'm doing regional planning and various other things. So I think I have a good handle on the conditions on the ground. And here is a map of the place that I'm talking about. What you see, Hangzhou is up north, and then we deal with Yandang Shan, which is, as the late Christopher Schipper told me at one point, Thomas, mountains also move, okay? What we have here are three different types of Yandang Shan. One is north, central, and southern. Tiantai Shan is a little further north, and Potor is a little further out. In the spring, the literati out of Hangzhou or any other place would visit Tiantai. In the fall, the same literati would visit Yandang. Okay, this is sort of one corridor, if you want. That corridor becomes clearer once we see a different kind of map. First, let me introduce you to these three different Yandang Shan here, northern, central, and southern. These yellow kind of blotches here, Wenzhou is in the middle. And you may recall that Wang Xizhi, in his day, after he was purged from the court, was the lieutenant governor of Yongjia, and Yongjia is the old Wenzhou. And Wang Xizhi was mining life-prolonging minerals in this area. Okay, you remember, or you may know about the Fugu Shi, to ingest the 5 stones. One of those 5 stones was found right here, okay? Among other things, this particular area yields incredible amounts of life-prolonging immortality type kind of drugs or medicinal kind of drugs, okay? Another famous resident of the area was Tao Hongjing, and Professor Kirkova had a whole slide on him. He relocated to this particular area in 512 and stayed here until 513. Okay, the area or the little Caomao, the little abode that he constructed for himself, is on a mountain called Xiaoyushan, which is now called Taoshan, which is now the 28th small grotto heaven. Okay. The number 9 middle school of Rui'an County is now right there on this particular location. Okay, so here we are along the coast, and if we look at the distribution of the Dongtian Fudi, for example, this sort of Taoist sacred or construction of Taoist sacred topography and geography, we immediately notice that it is a very, very dense area. If you have been to Zhejiang, if you've traveled to Zhejiang, you come across so many different and diverse and interesting religious sites. I think the sort of density is unrivaled anywhere in the country, basically, right? So Taoshan Xiao 28 here, that is in dedication to Tao Hongjing's sojourn in this particular location. And you see that there are many, many other of these Dongtian in the area, some of them in the first order of the 10 great. Okay. Visual introduction, these are photographs I took in 1984 or 1985. I have gray hair, so you know, I can sort of relate. This is an extraordinary geomorphology. It's volcanic in origin, and the way the mountains have eroded is unique. As I said, I've been to 1890 mountains in China, and I've seen many other pictures of all these national parks and geoparks. This is a unique site, okay? And this is a pastoral kind of scene from the 1980s, just by way of introducing this kind of topography to you. Dongyuguan, we have a multitude of Taoist and also Buddhist temples on site. This is the famous Longqiu, the famous dragon waterfall. This is from another visit I did in 2012. You see really, really interesting geomorphological sort of peaks and rocks and all that. Water, of course, plays a huge role here. And you've got cliff temples like on northern Hongshan, and you've got the caves. Basically, the whole sort of architectural and geological vocabulary of a sacred site is assembled in this particular location. Okay. What I'm interested in as a ecologist, if you want, or somebody who is interested also in the history of environment, are these kinds of narratives and descriptors. For example, Shenhua or Shenhua, if you want, on the geology of this particular place. He says, if one seeks for the principle behind how this was formed, it appears the result of violent action by a huge river that carried away the sand and earth and so on. He was wrong. This is volcanic in origin. But there are early, really very early attempts of trying to establish the principles behind how such a miao, such a mysterious and magnificent place was created in the first place, okay? Here's another list of these kinds of narratives and general descriptors. Gule Tashan, it is unlike any other, okay? That's by Shenhua again here. Zeshan Buke Ji by Fang Bao. It is beyond description, right? Fang Bao again says that this particular place has retained its geological integrity and has not suffered the indignities of Buddhist or Taoist rock inscriptions and embellishments, okay? Which is very important in today's context, but I don't want to go there. By Li Xiaogang, he says, you first have to wait until a certain season when all the critters and snakes and so on and so forth have left the building, so to speak, and then you can go in, okay? This is an area which in the Tiantai Shanji, for example, which is just north of it, was described in the 10th century as still having snakes and tigers and a very, very comprehensive network of alien or sort of unfamiliar kind of critters. Okay, you needed Baopuzi's charms and talismans to go into these kinds of spaces, you know, in a secure fashion. Anyway, Chenshan says in the spring you go to Tiantai, in the fall you go to Yandang. Chenshan again says these mountains are just sort of heaped on top of each other in 1,000 different ways. And Changxian here says Yiyohu. okay, I suspect there are tigers. And these suspicions were not wrong. There were tigers in these areas. Fang Shanghui in 1731, he wanders through these areas or through this particular area, and he gets lost, and he comes across a little community of Fangshi. He really calls them Fangshi. So that's an interesting kind of term, because you would associate maybe Fangshi with the Han Dynasty or a little bit later, but here in the Qing, you still have that particular term. I don't want to go through all of this. Chen Shan here in the middle, he says, even Mi Fu, he wouldn't be able to paint this place. Kang Youwei, who is a well-traveled Chinese reformer, he says, there are no places in the world that are like that. And you have to name Tiantai and Yandang in one sentence. The clause that I like best, perhaps, out of all these sort of descriptors and narratives and so on, is by Huang Yue, right? He says, "Armu shi jiugui." You have to abandon basically your traditional ways of seeing and hearing, right? All your five senses have to be recalibrated or remade, because the traditional way you were using them in this particular environment is of no use. Last one we'll just skip, I think. So I ran this poetry. There are several hundred of these, and Yoji and so on. I ran this through a word cloud generator, and this is what I came up with. Zhao Hua, Xianren, Huntun, and all these sort of Taoist tropes. This is a more more elaborate representation of what you come up with when you feed this type of poetry into a word cloud generator. And perhaps you're familiar with it. If not, it's a fun thing to visualize basically the frequency of certain terms and words. Okay. Now, the poetic repertoire of Yandang Shan, just to get a sense of the scope and breadth of the literary celebrations, here are some names. Xie Lingyun has been mentioned before. Zheng Youxin from the Tang, Shen Guo, Shen Gua, Su Shi, Zhao Bian, Wang Shipeng, Bai Yuchan, who was one of the Southern Song Taoist masters, Ran Yuan, Fang Bao, Kang Youwei, and then we have Guomo Ruo and Cai Yunpei and people like that. So it continues unabated, I would actually say, throughout the centuries, that people have visited this particular place and left sort of a large sedimentation of literary heritage behind. Okay, and these are only the literati that do not paint. If we had another slide for painters who had arrived at this particular place, then we would have some very, very important names as well.